So, what is important, and I think one thing how I also thought about this presentation was, I calculated there are roughly 20 presentations which you will hear over the attending the symposium. And a rough estimate is that you will see probably in the order of 1,000 slides. So I asked myself, what really sticks with you? Like, what do you still remember at the end of the workshop, in a week, in a month? And this, I ask myself when I give, teach a class, and I find out that the students, I ask them a month later and they have no idea anymore that we talked about this. So I tried to kind of put together a presentation with hopefully a few memorable elements to it. So first, a couple of acknowledgements. We have a couple of NSF grants which study some of the work which I'm talking about. Even the roots go much further back. And David McDonald should deserve credit for being somewhat one of the architects of the SOX effort. And we have one of those grants, we have one of the cyber-enabled discovery grants. Then also this work is not work which I just have done, so if you have difficult questions you can ask Holger, who sits here, who has done a lot of work. There is related research at CU, and there is a project which my colleague Glacia Palin had, and Joanne White is here, and if you have questions about this, you can ask her. And I wrote a paper about this, which you can look up if you are interested, which is on my website. So, we had this center for roughly 20 years. We had quite a few PhD students graduating, and this was sort of a slogan which we developed. What we wanted to do, basic research on real problems. And I had many discussions with Ben on his ideas that we should address national priorities. Your question just came up that we should be more problem-driven. So this was the basic architecture, to start off with important problems, then to work in the space of theoretical frameworks, system building efforts, study practice in doing assessment, and then asking ourselves what is the impact of this research. And the spiral indicates I can start with different things. I can first do a data collection which helps me to contribute to my requirements, what I really try to do. And so incrementally what the spiral tries to indicate by moving between these different things, and this may also provide a little bit longer term consistency, we get deeper insights. So I think that came up numerous times, and I like this quote. It's originally in German, but an English translation would look like this, by Marx, that philosophers interpret the world in various ways, but what matters is to change it. And we have often framed sort of our research question by saying we want to contrast understanding how things are. And there we study existing systems, we do data collection. But then we also want to complement this with exploring how things could or should be. And we want to develop new systems. And what I will do today is to show you a number of developments which sort of are integrated in both of these aspects, but like the previous slide also tried to indicate, we always wanted to try to do both things. So how do we understand these cultures of participation? It's a shift from consumer cultures, where the focus was to produce finished goods to be consumed passively by other people, to cultures of participation, where the focus is to provide all people with the means to participate actively, and I will return to this phrase a number of times, in personally meaningful problems. Because I think that is a concept which evolved over time in our research activities. So, in the spirit of that problems are important, we can ask, well, what are the type of problems which cultures of participation may be able to tackle? Well, we have problems of a magnitude which even individuals or large teams cannot solve. And I will show you examples of this. We have problems of a systemic nature, and this little conversation just at the end of the previous talk indicated this. You want to have different minds collaborating because they do not find neatly in one discipline. We have problems which are poorly understood and ill-defined. And the interesting aspect of this is, if we cannot be involved ourselves as participants, it's difficult to delegate these problems to other people because we do not understand them. And we have problems which model changing in unique worlds, and therefore they depend on open living information repositories and tools. So these are a class of problems, and I will show you examples how we tackled some of those. So let me start with showing you two movies, and as Ben said, I skied a little bit in my life. And the first movie is a movie in the spirit of cultures of participation. So I talk about cultures of participation, so I felt I should post at least one movie on YouTube to say I have experienced that. And you see, it's only 1.5 minutes long. It has been there for a few years. It only has 210 views. So I don't put this up to show, how great I am. It's actually, very poor result, because the second movie, which I will show you, has 137 views. So, what is a contribution of my movie? But I think the interesting thing is, if you think about these cultures of participation, we have to understand that the objects and the people whom we want to address are of a very different range. So the use of these movies is maybe to tell the others about helicopter skiing, if you have never done this and you are interested in this. I could submit it as application material for my skiing ability. So if Ben invites me to ski with him, I can say, look, this is what I can do. Are you willing to take me along on your ski trips? So I can do this. I can remember this vacation. And so it's in some ways personally meaningful. So 210 views are okay. I didn't have the intention to produce this movie so to show it to the world at large. And then we can think about what are the technologies and the knowledge how to use this technology to create something like this. If we want to create a culture of participation, this is an important issue. And who has ever heard of Warren Miller, just out of curiosity? So I will show you a little movie from him. And these guys, they fly with helicopters over the skiers. The skiers are much better than I am. They ski in different terrain. So I use this as hopefully maybe one memorable story of all of this. So let me start with my movie. So I have no responsibility for the sounds, but
oh, I actually. Do you need the sound?
Yeah, a little bit, maybe. Not too much.
Ah, it's a good one! Go, go, go! Yeah! Whoa! Yeah!
So you see, I mean,
Whoa!
we only come out sort of this.
Oh yeah! All right, next gang! Come on, Jonas! Get up! I got you! Under my skin! Fine. All right. Ah, now we're talking.
So, if one doesn't fall down at the end, it doesn't qualify. Doesn't count.
They erase your pictures.
Automatic eraser.
Okay, so this is low cost production, no production values. I mean, the technologies which we had, the person was sitting there who was filming us. We come out and you don't recognize anyone unless you know who it is, and so on. So let me show you a Warren Miller movie. So will the same happen with the link?
Possibly.
Where am I?
So how long have you been living like this?
So this is 10 seconds of advertisement which I didn't know how to edit out. In a culture of participation, I would like to know this. I mean, I could have started at 10 seconds. So, so as you can see, these are much better skiers than I am. And they ski also in different places.
The experience that you're getting at that moment is something that can't be quantified.
So it always keeps my heart going, and it's always a lot of fun. I don't think that's ever going to get old.
I don't know if there is anywhere better in the world to be than right here, right now.
Watch the movie yourself. It's on YouTube. So why did I show you this? Well, the point is, if you talk about cultures of participation, I mean, we have the opportunity to create movies which are potentially available for the whole world, but obviously we don't want to compete, or we cannot compete with respect to production values with a movie made by Warren Miller. But I think this notion of personally meaningful, if you want, you have a child and it plays, she or he plays at the beach, you don't want to hire a professional company to make a movie of them, but you want maybe to do this for if the child grows up, or to send it to grandma, and so on. So here are a few remarks which we collected, or which we are collected. This is a selection of why cultures of participation may be an interesting concept to pursue. So the first one is from Horst Riddle, and he says basically, if we participate in a decision, even if the outcome is the same, we like the decision more. I think this is an important issue which comes up in numerous cases. The second one is from Christopher Alexander. He is the guy who wrote the book about patterns, and he believes that people should be involved in the design of the buildings in which they eventually live. The third one is from the open source communities, which also says the hacker culture is fundamentally linked to questions about human motivation, and I will come back to this a little bit later. There's a very nice book which I can recommend from Van Hippel about democratizing innovation. He says users that innovate can develop exactly what they want, rather than relying on manufacturers to act as their often imperfect agents. And the last one is from a book by Benkler, which I think provides some sort of maybe broader foundations for and ideas about cultures of participation. So for me, thinking about this issue started over 10 years ago when I wrote a paper entitled Beyond Couch Potatoes, From Consumers to Active Contributors. And I was all enthusiastic and thought, I'm an active contributor, this is a good thing to do, to participate in everything. Until I found out that sometimes I really like to be a consumer. And I think I also got a lot of criticism for this paper. And I think this led us to what I now consider an important distinction, that we can fail in two directions. That sometimes I want to be a designer, but I am forced to be a consumer. And this is in personally meaningful problems, things we truly care about. But we can also fail in the other direction, namely, we want to be a consumer, but are forced to be a designer. And this is for personally irrelevant problems. So if you walk in an airport today, you are forced, more or less, to check in yourself. You can think about banking elements, you can think about checking out at supermarkets, where some of us, we want to be consumers, but we are forced to be designers. So this is, I think, an important distinction where this notion of personally meaningful plays an important role. So there are concepts. What we really want to develop is a coherent framework for this notion of cultures of participation. And there are a set of emerging concepts. Like one concept used by numerous groups is prosumers, to indicate that we break down the borders between producers and consumers. Another concept is proams, to break down the differentiation between professionals and amateurs. There are slogans like user-generated content, wisdom of crowds, crowdsourcing, long tail. And I think what's needed is a better model to understand and foster cultures of participation, and this would also include then that this is part of a model to better understand technology-mediated social participation. So we can, in a very initial attempt to come up with some elements of such a model, is we try to identify some strengths, and you can engage the talent pool of the whole world in a culture of participation. You put owners of problems in charge. I could make my own movie. You make all in different voices heard. You reach extensive coverage. I think one of the great things for me in Wikipedia is the immense amount of coverage. And you expose artifacts to public scrutiny, which may influence quality in a positive way. I think along with this, we also should reflect on what are weaknesses of cultures of participation. So one can say collective is not always better. Under which condition is it better and which condition is not better? We may suffer of a loss of individuality. There may be an accumulation of irrelevant information. I mean, the number of YouTube movies is basically infinite. As we sit here, the statistic says, every minute, 3 hours of movie watching is uploaded, whatever the exact numbers are. And most YouTube movie we probably never want to see. So there's a lack of coherent voices. then I think, and I won't have too much time to go into this, that companies offload work to customers. So there's an interesting question, what are drawbacks of a do-it-yourself society? And I just mentioned, already some examples with checking in your own, checking in yourself, checking out your own groceries. And the problem is that customers lack the experience and the broad background knowledge to do tasks efficiently and effectively. And you can even think, that we have to typeset our own paper. I actually, while I was here, I had to struggle with a publishing company because they gave me such a tough time that I wasn't exactly following the publishing guidelines. But I don't have the broad knowledge because I don't do this all the time. Like in older days, there was a separation of expertise in the different areas. So this is just a table of different systems we looked at and which we have taken into account. You may know some of those. I mean, the Encyclopedia of Life, Jenny Breeze has studied this. She has a SOX project about it. Again, out of curiosity, who has ever heard of SketchUp in 3D Warehouse? A few of you. Who has ever contributed a model to the 3D Warehouse? Here are a few more. The Scratch environment. I think another really interesting one is Patients Like Me, which is sort of an alternative way of exchanging information, again, very much in a personally meaningful way. The basic story there is, we may be interested in Parkinson's disease. And we may have an intellectual interest and want to understand this disease. But the moment, if someone tells us we have Parkinson's disease ourselves, or a close family member has Parkinson's disease, then this becomes personally much more meaningful. And I think Patients Like Me is an interesting network to analyze from this perspective. So what I want to show you are a few examples, not in any detail. The first one, as I said, talk to Jenny. The last one, I have applied these ideas to my own teaching activities, and if you have enough interest, you can go to my homepage. There are links to many courses which I have developed and talked about applying these principles to see them more as cultures of participation. So SketchUp, this is the system where you create 3D models. Then you can upload them to a 3D warehouse. And the question is, what would, and when I asked you who knows SketchUp, quite a few hands went up. When I said, who has ever contributed a model to SketchUp, nobody did this. You shouldn't worry about this because we have the whole world population as potential contributors. And there are a lot of people who develop a SketchUp model. So what I wanted to do is to basically show you another little movie. What will motivate people to participate in SketchUp? And this will give an account of
the top one.
Thanks.
A lot of the reason that I started modeling buildings in Google Earth is because I'm proud of my hometown. It was, interesting seeing big cities like New York to have all these models popping up, but seeing that it could happen in Calgary or Vancouver or Edmonton was just exciting. I think the favorite model that I've done is of a high-level bridge. It's a really prominent structure in downtown Edmonton, and when you're in Google Earth, seeing this bridge pop up is definitely, unexpected. What I model, basically, it's my city, but it's also my neighborhood. It's where I live and where I work. And so when I do models in Google Earth, it's sort of seeing the city the way I see the city.
We found tremendous
value in modeling our downtown because we wanted to have an opportunity for other people to be able to experience our downtown. We can actually bring people into the downtown thanks to SketchUp by making 3D models of our buildings using the way it is embedded into Google Earth. We were hoping to start with just one block on it's known as Waverly Place. It is the center of the downtown. We were going to start with that block, and then the project grew, and it ended up, I think we had 23 volunteers, and each took 3 buildings. So that portion of the project is complete, but people can't let go because SketchUp is so addictive to do. They're doing more buildings, and they're going further east. To add that 3-dimensional aspect to it, it really gives you a feel for walking around the downtown.
I think what I'm most excited about seeing it in 3D is the relationship that this campus has with the city of Boston. It's really hard for people who've never been here to understand what it is about Boston University that separates it from other schools. And it's hard to communicate that through 2-dimensional images. So we brought on a third.
So again, if you want, you can watch this movie. If you want, you can watch this yourself. But I think this question, which turns one of these collaboratively constructed sites through cultures of participation into a success versus a failure, I think is closely related that we need a better understanding of motivation and what motivates people to do so. We participated, Google, SketchUp was owned or was a part of Google. In the meantime, it has moved on to another company. But they bring the 300 top modelers once a year to Boulder and discuss with them further development. So there are 10,000 of people constructing 3D models. And the question is this, someone brought up that Wikipedia, is sort of, there are questions, is the dynamic still the same? This holds for this also. So the 3D warehouse, you collect all these models. There are different roles like curator models, and the Encyclopedia of Life also has studied this very closely. What are the role of curators? And we have looked into curator roles. There's also the interesting question, what tools do we give to curators to do their job effectively? And what you get out of it, this is a model of using 3D, which you get if you turn on the 3D flag from downtown Denver, and this building in the foreground is the Denver Public Library, which I showed you earlier, as a particular model developed in SketchUp. So this is the first example which I wanted to give you, and it was, it's a big success if we count the number of people who participate in this. So another program at NSF was Creativity and IT. And we got a couple of projects from this program, and one, or the 2 projects, were supposed to develop new wiki-style environment where the whole community, meaning all people who had grants from this program, would get together. And there is, as you see over there's a link to a graduate student community. So we took doctoral consortia contribution from a certain conference and seeded this environment. We thought the idea was that graduate students doing PhD thesis on the topic of creativity and IT could work together, could interact with each other. And we developed new ideas about support mechanism and so on, but the success was at best modest. It never really took off. It never reached really the tipping point. And we ask ourselves repeatedly, what did we not do a good enough job? Why could we not motivate people to participate in it? First of all, maybe who had seen this before? Ben, but no one else. So I mean, this is an interesting question. Is the first level is how do people become aware of such sites? And there are, you know, 10,000s, whatever. And I mean, we try to get the community involved, and actually from a different NSF program, a group at Arizona State University just got a NASA grant to revive this work which we have done and potentially carry it further. But very modest success, and we still don't, we tried to analyze the data, we interviewed people, and we still have vague ideas, not a good explanation, why did we not succeed. So our recent grants deal with energy sustainability, so maybe fitting Ben's call to address problems of national importance. For those of you who have never thought about this, what happens there and what the ideas are is you have an electric grid, and then currently there's a huge, there are huge developments with lots of money involved to build a smart grid. And that means you have a smart distribution network, you have smart meters and advanced smart infrastructures. We attended a conference a little while ago, and people said there were 300 conferences just last year addressing problems related to the smart grid development. What we are interested in is not, you know, to create more energy, to distribute more effectively, but we are interested in the human grid, the social environment, where how much, you know, do people need to understand to move from passive consumers of electricity to active contributors, being informed by smart meters. It may be changing their behavior towards how they use energy. So here are a few things. Most of what I said here on this slide I said already. I mean, one interesting thing is that one really can speak of energy illiteracy. And most people, and this is well documented through interviews, and I don't know how you would respond to it, you know, what is electricity? And they think, well, you plug a plug into the wall and electricity comes out. And how do you, you know, understand it? How do you measure it? Why should you care about this? The information presentation is poorly designed. So if you pay your own energy bill, how does that work? Anyone? How do you get an energy bill? You look at it? You understand what it means?
I have too many computers.
Yeah. So, and the feedback which we get is really not pervasive enough to change human behavior. So all these questions which we pursue are in the intersection of human behavior at the individual and social level and the technology. So we have worried a lot about feedback mechanisms and how this could increase the potential of energy savings. And the question was, what kind of feedback and given when? In this case, we relied sort of on previous work which we have done as well as other people to incorporate this into these approaches. There's also, when people spoke earlier about interdisciplinary collaboration, there is a whole discipline which labels itself as eco-arts. And what they try to do is rather to provide feedback in the form of you have used so many kilowatt hours, to provide feedback in a way which motivates people more, which makes things more understandable. So we closely look at data. Even I said we are always interested not just to look at data, but to build on the inside of data. This is data from a large study which a colleague of us at the University of Colorado conducted. And what it basically says that if you have real-time plus feedback, which is real-time feedback down to the individual appliance level, that this leads to energy savings. So rather than getting a bill at the end of the month, you can observe, and through the right kind of software environment, you can observe this on your whatever iPhone or laptop. You could observe now, if this system is in place, what is the energy consumption from your home which currently happens. So we use this, and this is a system which Holger constructed. Another interesting issue is which role do social norms play? So if you compare yourself with neighbors, how much energy do you use? And is that you are the biggest energy hog in the neighborhood? Is that an important element which people should be aware of? And I mean, an interesting question which surfaced a number of times is how much does this reach into privacy issues? But we try to study sort of the literature on social norm, understanding some of the experiments which people have done and apply to this research. So this is a work on energy-related stuff. For a long time, we worked on urban planning problems. And we worked with tabletop computing environments. And the basic idea was to bring people from different backgrounds together. So these were really interdisciplinary constituencies discussing issues. So this notion of culture of participation, we do not only see it that this is sort of to be studied in online communities. I think this is another very interesting application domain of analyzing cultures of communities. So I showed you several examples. Some we did with other organizations together, some we developed ourselves, some of them were at best marginal successes, if not failures. Some of them attracted a lot of people. Along with kind of stepping back from this individual development, we wanted to create some conceptual frameworks to think about these issues, potentially applicable to all cultures of participation. And I put this stuff in red because this is, I will not talk about. If you look at my slides, you can read about it in more detail. So what I want to talk about briefly about is meta design and ritual ecologies of participation. So meta design is something what we have pursued for some time, and we see it as that we design for designers. If we talk about cultures of participation, for the people to participate means they engage in design activities. So I think it would be an interesting question to pursue, with your final comment, knows the user and everything else will fall in place. I mean, knowing the user, what kind of user? Is the user empowered to act as a designer? If we allow the user to act as a designer, how much control do we give up, and so on? So one of the interesting things is that if you look at all kinds of artifacts, there are two times. One is the design time and one is the use time. And a lot of methodologies from user-centered design to participatory design have primarily looked at design time. But at this time, you cope with the world as imagined. We predict what may happen later. Whereas at use time, you can cope with the world as experience. Here you have to deal with predictions. Here you have to deal with reality. Here you deal with planning. And here you deal with situated action. And if you have followed sort of the literature around expert systems and so on, while they have not worked too well, is because these open systems need some involvement need continuous development after they are designed. And if we want the users to have something to say, we need to pursue something like meta design to make this happen. The next topic which I briefly want to mention is to think about richer ecologies of participation. And in the past, we sort of had, simple, and I mentioned this earlier, distinction between software developers and users, producers and consumers, professionals and amateurs. And in the futures, there will be more roles. And if you look into some environments, you have producers, you have people who engage in rating, tagging. I mentioned already that in the 3D warehouse or in the Encyclopedia of Life, they studied very carefully the role of curators. Then another element initiated originally by Boninardi's book was to say, well, if we look at these roles, we should not just look at the individual level, but we should look at the community, and she could provide evidence that you have the developments of power users, local developers, gardeners. And Jenny and Ben wrote a nice paper about the reader-to-leader framework, and this has many similarities with our way to conceptualize this. Namely, at one level you have unaware consumers. So you may not never heard about SketchUp. Nobody heard about the Creative IT Wiki. So if you are not aware, then there's no way to participate. So the first thing is that as a consumer you become aware of possibilities. You may turn into a collaborator, you may turn into a designer, and you may turn into a meta designer. And the interesting question is, what motivates you to migrate along this path? And what the people remarked about Wikipedia is, even it's not put into this diagram, that people also may go back from the more demanding role and says, well, I don't have the time, I have done my part, and so on. And so an interesting question is, how do we facilitate this? And what is the right number of people to have in the more demanding roles? So again, to show that we try to collect data, a couple of my students did a PhD thesis to study open source communities, and one of them identified these roles in open source communities. So, for example, a bug reporter would report a bug fixer would not only report the bug, but also send a fix along. And so, obviously, a bug fixer is a slightly more demanding role. And I would argue that many communities or cultures of participation have a structure where the roles may be different labeled, but I think they have great similarities to this ecology. And it shows that the ecology is not just sort of a binary state between two different things. So in the last part, let me argue that there is sort of thinking about cultures of participation establishes new discourses. And I argued for motivation. And one thing what we have thought a fair amount about is that participation is an issue of value over effort. So if people feel they get an immense value out of it, they also don't mind the effort. If the value is small, then there should also be a small effort, otherwise nobody will participate. Another good example, which I will show you in my last movie, is about fun as a motivating force. so, in some ways, if we really want to design new systems and we want to find out ways how can we motivate people to participate, maybe to think about how can we exploit fun may be a worthwhile activity to reflect upon. We have looked at this numerous times, debated it, and one interesting question which we can't answer because it's not our movie and we weren't involved with the people, is how sustainable is this effort? I mean, if I picture myself, these piano stairs may be exciting, but after I went up the piano stair 10 times, do I now have enough? So these are the interesting questions to be asked. I mean, other interesting issues are questions of control, which you have in cultures of participation, because people can modify the system, and are the original designers always in accordance with this? The notion of ownership, autonomy, quality. And so people have written papers about this, reflected upon this, but I think these are concepts which are equally important for if technology-mediated social participation unites our efforts. I would argue that these concepts are relevant concepts to be reflected upon. So, developments always have trade-offs. So we talked about the trade-off between personalization, context-aware systems, and privacy issues yesterday. So what we can identify and have tried to identify advantages of cultures of participation, but also disadvantages. And one of things which is really critical in my mind is participation overload. And participation is more demanding than just absorbing information, and we have talked a lot about information overload, but participation overload is really can become a serious problem. And this is, I think, where this concept of personally meaningful comes in. I mean, I would like to participate in many more things, but I don't have time for. And so I'm sure that all of you feel the same way. I mean, you brought up a concept that I can set all these privacy flags, but is that what I want to spend my time on? I just encountered, I use Microsoft's Hotmail, and I encountered a problem, and then I was exploring the space, and I could probably spend a week just to understand all the options which I have. It's not on the top of my list. So participation overload is a very serious issue. And then there is the interesting question of, do we create fragmented cultures because we have too many idiosyncratic voices? So we want to have different voices. We want to make all voices heard, but to which extent does that create a sort of modern version of the Tower of Babel? This is to engage people in personally irrelevant activities. We can say, and I mentioned this already, we have all become telephone operators and travel agents, check-in clerks, check-out clerks, file expense reports and typeset-hour papers, many more things. And if I picture myself as a faculty member, I do this very rarely. I'm not good at it. And so this raises interesting questions of, do-it-yourself societies. And then we can ask, who are the winners? Just like with the issues where people debated, we provide information to Google. Who are the winners? Is it Google? Is it us? Now, another interesting question is, I don't know how you feel about it. I asked my students who were your age, and I said, well, if you have a 15-year-old sibling, do you think they are already more digital natives than you are? Meaning, they were 10 years younger than most of you. And they said, yes, my whatever sibling already deals with all of these issues already very differently. So an interesting question is, if we see these things as burdens, you know, is it only because we were educated, we grew up in a certain way? So if you walk into an airport, do you check in your luggage yourself? Do you get your own boarding pass? Some leftovers who gives the luggage to an agent? No? Nobody anymore?
It costs too much to check in anything, so you think about a plane, right?
That's another change, or you should become a frequent flyer, so it allows them to check luggage for free. Okay, so in conclusion, what I think I argued for, what I wanted to show you, some of the research which we have done, that culture of participation represent opportunities and challenges to provide all citizens, and I think that's an important attribute, with a means to become co-creators of new ideas, knowledge, and products in personally meaningful activities, where they really care about, where they want to make a difference, then they should have the tools, the knowledge, the opportunities to contribute something to make the world or to change the world in a direction in which they would like to see the world moving. Thanks.
Okay, questions, comments, challenges? Thank you.
Yeah, you have some really interesting slides. One is about the big step between not being aware and then becoming aware of the possibilities for participation. And I was wondering if you had like good papers or citable sources about these kinds of things.
Yeah, I mean, if you go to my homepage, there are PDF files of the papers which I should say we have published, and from the title you can usually infer, depending on your interest, that there is something maybe about richer ecologies of participation.
Okay, so most of the stuff you've presented here has been published somewhere.
Yeah, I mean, at least many parts of it. Yeah, and obviously in somewhat more detail and better argued, maybe more detailed documentation.
Great, thanks.
Yeah.
Certainly, I'm in favor of participation because usually it means exercise, and that's good for your health. But on the edge of this, there are a number of technical and economic issues which have as much influence as any cultural one. The rejoinder that we don't check our baggage not because we don't like the idea, not because we don't want to be a consumer of that. It's just it has a financial value, and we make the trade-off. And like going into technology, there's some things I can't do, or my younger colleagues may be able to do at the moment, but I used to be able to do. Simply represents a change in the technology from in the software realm from DOS to Unix. It's not that one did it better than the other; it just changed on it. How do you keep separate those areas where there might actually be participation if we could simplify the task? People could all design their own clothes if we had enough automatic cloth cutting machines and sewing machines. And things which you can't really do so well on your own, like design a bridge.
Yeah. Well, the example which I gave you with the two movies, addresses this issue. I mean, I cannot produce movies of the quality of Warren Miller because I would need helicopters, I would need access to the best skiers in the world, and so on. But I can do it at some meaningful level, personally meaningful level. And I mean, the other part of the issue is, yes, we want to create, tools which make these activities doable without extensive training. And this is what I think computer science has done all along.
I guess I'm not sure I agree with your example. Warren Miller set out to literally create entertainment and to
Yeah.
glorify his own name.
Yeah.
You may have been out to glorify yourself, I don't know about that piece of steel, but nothing you said about it made it sound like it was meant to be entertainment for other people. It was a recording for your own memory.
Well, yeah, but I could create this at least. Don't you agree? I mean, and you can watch it if you like it.
But nothing you said about it made it sound like it was meant to be entertainment for other people. It was a recording for your own memory. Video task. Well, one was something that was a keepsake, and the other was something that was meant for other people to see, literally to have. This question came up yesterday. What's the author's interaction with the audience? Warren Miller has a very different interaction with his audience than you have with yours, and I'm not sure that's a legitimate comparison. It's tougher, or it's hard to find examples where the technology is the only issue. You might say there are some flat examples like the open source software, where the technology is so well diffused. There's so many people that you can have people who do it as industry and people who do it as participation.
You know, if you understood that I wanted to present a view that the technology is a critical issue, then somehow I wasn't able to communicate our intentions very well. I mean, the technology is necessary, but not sufficient. And I mean, we have created technologies which people then, had to acquire to participate in it. And for me, this was not something what I mentioned in this talk, but the most fundamental example of this is that we invented reading and writing. And then for centuries, most people could not participate. They were dependent on scribes who would read and write for them. And in today's world, many people are dependent on high-tech scribes, so other people do something for them. And I collected all these arguments where Alexander says, well, people should have some influence in designing their own houses. And this is that obviously we don't want to have people who have no expertise to build or tear down structure-bearing walls. But maybe how your room should be painted, where you want to put your pictures up, and so on. This should be more under your control rather than under the designer's control.
What I'm concerned is that there's actually a very limited sphere where you've got that kind of choice.
I don't think so. I think it's open to, I see this happened all over the place. I mean, we now all, probably everyone in this room typesets her or his own paper. And this is where there were technological developments like laser printers, there were software developments. I mean, when I first started to write papers, what we had as consumers were a typewriter, and you had to send it to a professional publishing company. So I could, enumerate an infinite set of examples.
And you can design your own shirt. You can actually get the fabric woven and design the cut, and they will then ship it for you. So there's a whole sort of layers of things, of ways that you can more and more do it yourself. But all right, but thank you again, Gerhard. I have to. Thank you.